Outgoing Anglo American CEO Cynthia Carroll had a frank discussion today around the challenges facing South Africa's mining industry following the events at Marikana and the subsequent wave of industrial unrest in the sector. Carroll also advocated a path for all mining stakeholders to follow in the interests of building a successful future for both this key industry and for South Africa. This is what she had to say.
Mining is at the heart of the South African economy. It has a critical role to play in supporting the aspirations of the new growth path and the objectives of the National Development Plan. And it is an industry with long-term horizons. Like any other nation, South Africa will only succeed if it fosters an environment that is conducive to business and attractive to international investors. In the case of Anglo American Platinum, the board and the management team have been very clear. The position is unsustainable, and we do need to take action. In February of this year, we announced a strategic review of Anglo American Platinum's business. That review is drawing to a close, and we expect to make a decision early in the new year. We will not shirk from taking tough decisions.
Joining us for more, Cobus Nell, mining analyst at Stanley. We will not shirk from taking tough decisions. What does that mean?
Yeah, look, I mean, you know, they're going to need to do what they got to do to sort of pull the whole portfolio, I think, of Anglo American together again. You know, I think over the years, when I've seen many aspects of it, has been on the slide. You know, returns this year, I think, has been the lowest since the Great Depression, as we're probably going to see coming out of them. And, you know, platinum is a big part of their portfolio, you know, and they got to take the tough decisions. If there is excess capacity, you know, one got to be honest about it and see in the best way that you can manage it going forward. I think that's key.
We'll get that share price graph up, of course, right now in a moment. Anglo American, I'd like to look at that, and BHP. Hlelo, your thoughts on Anglo American?
Yeah.
Value trap.
Value trap. I think Anglo American is not cheap, actually. It's reflective of the risk involved in the company. And the only way the stock goes up is if someone from the board as well as the management team put together a fantastic recovery plan and begin to demonstrate that these assets have a reason to exist in the capital system, to earn above the cost of capital, generate free cash flow, share some of that along with share some of that with investors by way of dividends. That's the only way. You know, it's a turnaround strategy. Now, turnaround strategies are difficult for big companies. Look at Mutual, you know, Mutual, difficult.
But they got it right.
They got it right, but don't make a habit of thinking you can always get it right. You know, and it takes a few years, by the way.
Well, let's bounce this off Wayne. Is this a value trap, or is it the biggest opportunity in the South African investment space right now?
I disagree with Hlelo. I think it is showing big value, but I think you're going to wait a while for this to come. What's going to happen in Anglo American Platinum? I mean, we don't have to wait a year for the review. We don't have to wait another 2 months for the results. You know what's going to happen. They're going to shut production. They're going to shut, I don't know, 300,000 to 500,000 ounces. They're going to close X number of unprofitable shafts.
It's all very transparent, so there is no mystery.
Yeah, they're going to retrench X thousand number of people, and they're going to do two things. They're going to turn their business, make their business more profitable at the current platinum price, but maybe more important, they're going to try and up the current platinum price simply by cutting out production. So we know what's going to happen there. South America, Anglo American and South America, that's the big question, is there have been virtually countless billions sunk into there, and it just gets extended further and further, and the returns just look worse and worse and worse. But it will all eventually come right.
Hlelo says you're talking his story. You didn't see his body language there going, that's my point.
But I think it's in the share price.
Cynthia Carroll. Yeah. Her departure. She says it's time to hand over the baton. Is she being a scapegoat in this whole scenario?
Look, I mean, you know, I guess one got to see the, you know, it in context. You know, when she came in 2007, you know, there was a lot of pressure, I think, on Anglo American to sort of deliver on growth, deliver volume, and yeah, maybe she, you know, was perhaps too trigger happy on one or two deals. I think, especially going into those very high price environment, you know, was, you know, obviously on the cards. And you look at these projects and they all look good at those type of prices. And maybe also coming out of the global financial crisis, maybe they all chased the apparent demand that they saw from China, obviously, which is now clear that they've front loaded a lot of that commodity demand, and they've cut some corners. So capital allocation hasn't been as good as it should have been, and then more importantly, also the implementation of that capital has also been rushed, I think, in many cases, specifically in Minas Rios, the project in South America, where we $8.5 billion and counting, dollars counting. And so I think those are the key issues that you can look at Cynthia Carroll and say maybe she was too focused on South Africa. She had a very flat board structure. I think 11 people reported into her compared to BHP Billiton. We've got about 6 to 7 people, which I think is a more relevant structure. You've got a person that look after...
There's more accountability in a tighter group.
Correct. So you could maybe have one person that look after South Africa so that she doesn't have to, or the CEO doesn't have to get that intimately involved in these type of issues.
This is our resources expert, gentlemen. Any questions for Quibus?
Do we buy Anglo American?
Look, I mean, I don't think it's there cheap. And the reason why I'm saying on it is it's easy to look back to 2000 and to sort of look at type of returns that we've seen. And companies has grown in that space. We've seen a bull market of note, a super cycle from Chinese demand that I don't think a lot of people are sort of seeing that to be playing out over the next 10 years, okay, to the extent we've seen. So in a market like that, it's not a free-for-all. You got to then have the better quality assets in many cases to get the return on capital and to be able to add economic value to your share price and for your shareholders. And in many cases, unfortunately, I think Anglo American's portfolio, if you look at certain components of their portfolio, there's a lot of hard work to be done. And I don't think it's obviously going to play out overnight. But I think if you look from that perspective, it's a bull market. It's like extrata. I think if you tell me, listen, here tomorrow we go, and it's super cycle get going again.
And the game's on again.
Fair enough.
Then there'll be a re-rating along with all the resource stocks across the board.
100%. But in a tougher market, I would tend to stuck to maybe to the better quality, maybe like a BHP, the boring BHP Billiton.
So, 100% of what we know about a company represents its past. But 100% of its valuation is in the future, is dependent on the future. Here's what we know about the future. That going forward, mining companies or commodity companies that are going to be successful will have low-cost assets, operate super efficiently, and have high productivity with regard to those assets. Now, Anglo American has some low-cost assets, but has not been able to get productivity or efficiency out of its people or its assets.
But there's still hope for the future. It doesn't mean that if they can't extract those efficiencies down the line.
Let's put probabilities to it. I think because there's something endemic that is inferior about Anglo American. I mean, think about it. How can you blame one woman or one person for sinking a whole Titanic? What was the board? What was the corporate finance team? A whole team of advisors from Bain who advised her to make all these acquisitions, De Beers, which was horribly priced. Joining, they spent so much money on it now. Minas Rios. How is it one person's fault? So there's something endemic in that. We know the future.
It makes a very valid point.
Yeah, absolutely. But unfortunately, someone's got to take the ultimate responsibility. I mean, that's, I think that's the key job these days of a CEO, to be able to pull everything together and dictate the capital allocation. And yeah, sure, no one's got, sort of perfect foresight and being able to know exactly. Everyone makes mistakes. Even the, Marius Klopper, look at some of the scrutiny he's come over, especially from Australia, after some of the investments they've done. So, all of them do make mistakes. I think it's just to the measure that you actually control of some of these perhaps misallocations or, I think that's maybe where it comes in how you manage it.
The best thing that happened to BHP was the Rio deal didn't go.
Because Marius would have walked himself in exactly the same
position.
Into the same position.
Yeah, because you were buying assets
and then it would
at the
be
top
his
of the
head
cycle.
On the block. But you're right, somebody does ultimately have to take accountability. Now, let's weigh BHP versus Anglo American. In terms of, we've decided there's no rush to get into Anglo American unless you think that the resource super cycle is going to resume, everything is going to become hunky-dory with the world again. That's not going to happen in the short term. BHP, same set of circumstances?
Look, it's obviously not as exposed to, diamonds and platinum. On the other hand, it's got more on the energy side. It's oil and it's gas and so on, So it's a slightly different play from that perspective. And I guess if you sort of look at the company as a whole and its ability to operate its its assets and to get the most productive use out of those assets, then BHP Billiton has shown themselves. I mean, I've looked at, people always go on and say, look how cheap Anglo American's rump is, it's i.e. the unlisted part of the business. But if you look at that part and you compare to BHP Billiton since 2003-04, it actually has done poorly.
Let's get your thoughts on BHP.
Well, I think that BHP should actually, in due course become very expensive, because I can imagine that anyone who wants to buy commodities or resources will actually rush to it. It's
spoken like a true man who holds BHP.
Well,
Doesn't hold any Anglo
Well,
American.
it's a safe haven in the resource space. It's a safe haven. You're going to get your dividend. It's going to go up. You're going to get your margins being protected. You're going to get your asset turn. You're going to get your returns. Those things are pretty certain relative to Anglo.
Do you agree with Hlelo's scenario there?
I mean, maybe I always like the turnaround situation. I mean, Anglo is not going to disappear. Make no mistake. It's not going to do a one-time on us. It's not going to disappear. And you would assume that over time they would be able to get the required return from the assets, or dispose of the ones where they can't get the required return. And of course, I mean, shares are never cheap when there's good news around it. Never. Shares are only ever cheap when there's bad news around. So maybe I'm being a bit too optimistic. I know for a fact that it's going to take a long time to turn it. So maybe you don't buy now, maybe you sit and wait. But I still believe that there are lots of Chinese consumers out there with very little debt, and they're all going to become Americans eventually and all take on debt. And this will be a very strong growth engine for the world's economy. And the resource companies are focused towards it. Look, I mean, we own more Billiton than Anglos, a lot more, but we still own Anglos.
In terms of the analysis that you're doing right now, is there anything that you deem to be a sure bet in the resource environment? Now I'm really
Sure
pushing you
bet.
onto.
Sure
Am I
bet,
really
yeah.
testing my
Strong
luck
word.
here?
Yeah.
Look, I mean,
When
companies.
is anything in investment circles ever a sure bet?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the moment, perhaps two companies that look fairly attractive at current levels is Exxaro. I guess it's been hammered of late, and we've seen actually on the news of a softer mineral sands and pigment uptake. Obviously, that their second half earnings from that front has sort of melted away. And then obviously there was pressure on thermal coal prices, as we all know, and then the iron ore side, Kumba, from its strikes, etc., hasn't been doing good. But I think around about 150 rand, Exxaro do present a longer term proposition in terms of its coal business, the ability to grow off that. I believe the whole mineral sands and pigment side, which was very hot sort of last year this time, and now people are sort of shying away again. I think it's in the earlier part of its investment cycle. I think the producers that are there that will be able to supply into the market in due course should do okay. So that's one. And then African Rainbow Minerals is maybe another, where it's got good parts. Obviously it's got some issues within the business, but a little bit more risky. But I think if you want to look through the softer patch, it may be one that you want to throw your money behind.
There's one quick question that you've got.
Kobus,
Wayne.
what about Sasol and their gas deposits and their gas factories in North America?
Yeah, look, I mean, the big question becomes on the cost of energy and oil. And we've seen now in Saudi Arabia and to what extent they can still unleash cheap oil volume into the market. And that is always the worry when you got these alternative type of energies, I mean, it is risky. It's high cost. The technology is one that is expensive. To sort of implement. So
you're not enthused?
I'm not overly excited about that. I think there may be a lot of risk in terms of, again, capital allocation in that front and what kind of return one may get out of that.